Here we are for a quick deck tech with Gruul Midrange. Now this is a variant running Karn the Great Creator, so we don't really have a ton of a sideboard because we are running the Karn package, but definitely does give you some flexibility in the main deck. As far as the deck, it starts with the acceleration package, Arbor Elf, Utopia Sprawl. Potentially on turn 2, this can net you up to 4 mana. So if you Arbor Elf on turn 1, turn 2, Utopia Sprawl a forest, tap the forest, untap the forest, you suddenly have 4 mana on turn 2, and you have a very powerful 4-drop. But generally, you want to go 1-drop Accelerant into 3-drop play. Plenty of those to get to in a second. Renin 6, well, this is not the best Renin Ticks deck. It is certainly reasonable in terms of what it's executing. You have a Boseiju to recycle, you have a bunch of lands, or a bunch of fetch lands, and obviously Stomping Grounds, etc. And then you have a 1 of Sekenzan. So it's not the best Renin 6 deck. It is a card you should be running in most green-red decks, unless you're like some type of a Tarkus command deck, but I digress. Rest of the sideboard, or rest of the deck, Blood Moon, very good and is a key to the deck. It's what kind of draws people to the deck back in the day, and still to a certain extent now. This allows you to, especially if you can get it down on turn 2, potentially lock people out of the game, or buy yourself some time to close out the game. Messes with a lot of land bases, especially the 4 and 5 color mana bases, supporting things like Omnath, Creativity, etc. Bone Crusher Giant, the adventure creature, it's been a hallmark of this deck since it was printed. It's a split card. While obviously Stomp's not great for a modern format, it's still a nice card to have, as it does kill a lot of things in the format: Ragavan, Goblin God, Eidolon, etc. Kills mana dorks out of Yawgmoth, etc., etc. Seasoned Pyromancer, kind of the glue to the deck. Very similar to Fable the Mirror Breaker, this helps fix the wrong half of the deck problem, puts some bodies in play to kind of clog up the works or start pressuring your opponent. Overall, very solid card, has some utility out of the graveyard, so good when you're trying to flood out a little bit. Endurance, this is primarily here to address some of the deck's weaker matchups. This allows you to kind of reset Murktide's graveyard, it allows you to hit things like Living End, etc. Helps you have graveyard utility in the main deck that is not as slow as something like Klothys, while also being pressure against decks like Control. Klothys, obviously very good in the grinding matchups. Not as good as it once was. There's plenty of things in the format that answer it. Things like March of Otherworldly Light, Leyline Binding, etc. Prismatic Ending. One point in time, this was nearly unremovable from the battlefield, other than things like Teferi bouncing it. But now, it is somewhat reasonable to remove, especially out of the blue-white X decks, but still a card that can, if it sticks, can kind of take over the game, especially against decks like Burn and such. Karn we've already kind of talked about, the power and utility it presents, and then finally, 4 Copies of Fury. You're playing a red deck, really no reason not to run Fury unless you're a deck like Burn. This kind of answers a lot of problematic things, helps against go-wide decks, etc. Really helps set up against decks like Yawgmoth and such, buys you some time in some matchups, and can help with the matchups where you don't always have the acceleration to slow down those early aggression from red-based decks especially. Sideboard cards that there are: 2 copies of Ancient Grudge, Hammer Time pretty much, it can come in against a lot of other things, primarily things where you might expect, Chalice, which really doesn't affect you terribly much, but could come in that, but against decks like Affinity, Hammer Time, etc. Choke, anything that's playing a bunch of blue spells. Generally, they're going to have islands. Choke's pretty reasonable in those situations against like blue-white control and such. Sideboard, 1 card notably missing is Liquid Metal Coating, which I mistakenly removed from the deck before because I think I was having some problems borrowing the right cards. So Liquid Metal Coating should definitely be in your deck. Pairs quite nicely with Karn to help blow up your opponent's lands. Certainly would have helped in some spots in this league. Walking Ballista helps against creature-based decks, etc. Can be a finisher if you're locked out under something like Ensnaring Bridge. Tormod's Crypt and Relic of Progenitus helps against graveyard nonsense, along with Endurance and Klothys in the main deck. The usual players: Dredge, Living End, decks like Murktide, etc. Chalice of the Void, primarily here for the Cascade decks, can also wish for it against decks like Izzet Prowess, also potentially Death Shadow. Engineering Explosives can answer a whole bunch of tokens or a whole bunch of 1-drops, especially out of Hammer Time. Sky Sovereign, kind of your go-to against creature-based mid-range slugfests. Ensnaring Bridge slows the game down. If your opponent's got bigger creatures than you, it's kind of your way to stay alive. Pithing Needle shuts down just random annoying things like opposing planeswalkers, potentially channel abilities off things like Boseiju, etc. Haywire Might. This is a nice utility card, allows you to blow up some annoying things. The downside of it being exile target non-creature, non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. That said, there are still things you can blow up like ley lines, etc. Things out of the Enchantress deck. Nice little card to have access to, plus a little bit of life gain if you use it as a chump blocker against something like Burn. Elixir of Immortality, kind of double duty, pretty much against the aggressive decks and against mill. This allows you to recycle your deck back in addition to endurances. Really makes life annoying on the mill players while also having utility against aggressive decks. And finally, Liquid Metal Coating, which should be in this deck. Very good at the mid-range slugfests with Karn the Great Creator blowing up your opponent's lands. As a lot of land bases in the modern format only have like 1 or 2 copies of some tertiary color lands, so being able to blow up triumphs and stuff, really stretching your opponent's mana, making their leyline bindings and such worse. Definitely a card to have access to, or just blowing up your opponent's basics if they're locked in your Blood Moon. All different things you can do with this deck, and one of the things that can make Gruul very good. Beyond that, the deck is powerful, but it's not as powerful as it once was. Power of Blood Moon waxes and wanes. It's very easy to answer an Arbor Elf, etc. So, the deck is powerful. Doesn't see as much play as it probably should, but there are better options out there. But it is a deck you should still be aware of. That said, let's get into some gameplay and see how it goes. Hey everybody, and we are back for some more modern gameplay, this time with Gruul Midrange, formerly known as Gruul Ponza. So, a little bit of a deck that doesn't see as much play, but let's take a look at some games with the deck, shall we? Taking a look at our opening hand, with Ponza, you generally want an opener that involves some type of mana acceleration. This hand has that in spades, doesn't have a whole lot else going on except for an endurance, potentially a Besage you to interact with our opponent, but alas. Lead off, opponent leads on Misty Rainforest, we play Stomping Ground, play Arbor Elf. You generally want to play Arbor Elf first, especially if you think it's going to live for some reason. And we're up against Living End, so these endurances are going to be pretty nice. Play out Utopia Sprawl, untap, play out Karn. Our opponent cycles Waker of Waves. Karn resolves, presumably here. We'll go get Tormod's Crypt, or Chalice of the Void. That or Tormod's Crypt would have been fine. It's hard for them to interact with things. Opponent will go ahead and grief us here, or take one of our endurances. Pass the turn without the ability to Violent Outburst. We don't have much of a clock, but we go and grab Relic of Progenitus. Opponent does Waker of Waves again. Once again, kind of hard for them to fight through all this heat. We get a little bit lucky in game 1, obviously. Then we will go ahead and force them to exile a card. Probably should have cast Arbor Elf there. Opponent casts Architects of Will. We will go ahead and be able to bolt it at the end of turn to continue our offensive. Or I guess we might just be in line to cast Endurance, which I guess is the play that I was making here. Exile their graveyard. Go ahead, play that. We have all the mana we could possibly want, and our opponent scoops it up. Now, there won't be a whole lot of sideboarding as we are playing a version with a Karn Wish board, but we'll take a look at any sideboarding we want to do for game number 2. Alright, taking a look at our sideboard. Game number 2, we brought in a couple chokes. We're playing against an island deck, why not? Adds to the layers of what they have to fight through. Board out a couple of bolts because it's not particularly interesting in the matchup. We go ahead and look at our opening hand. This hand's got the acceleration. We should probably honestly throw back this hand as it has no graveyard interaction, especially considering we have endurances, Karns. I believe there's even some Clothai in this list. So we have plenty of cards to mulligan to. I choose to mulligan to a Karn hand, which could be slow on the draw. Turn 3 Karn into Tormod's Crypt. Not the best, especially if they can actually go off on turn 3. But alas, I think this is a keepable hand. Our opponent goes turn 1 Grief, which at least we have another Karn. I suspect they should have taken an Arbor Elf here, but they may just be able to go off on turn 3 and none of this matters. So they cycle a Striped Riverwinder. We go turn Seasoned Pyro. Pitching a Karn, which may not have been the best idea in the world. I think I was trying to dig towards Endurance plus green card. And our opponent doesn't do anything here, which seems a bit foolish to me, but we'll go ahead and attack, holding up Endurance. We're kind of really telegraphing this. Our opponent goes for Waker of Waves, passes turn, Striped Riverwinder, as if their graveyard wasn't already big. They now probably have Violent Outburst, and they're just trying to wait us out. We go ahead and attacks. They do nothing again, take 3 damage. They do nothing again. Opponent goes for Shardless Agent. They go for Living End. We bolt in response, put them to 6. Not sure why I bolted there. It does seem a little bit stupid. We go ahead and cast Endurance, thinking the game is over, and our opponent has Subtlety, gets to get this obnoxiously large graveyard back, and now we're just kind of deadsies. I guess we bolted because of grief. May have been a bit premature, but they get to take our Karn. We have only 1 Karn left in the deck, and that's pretty much game. So, you know, even when you're packing a ton of graveyard hate, it can be a rough ride. All right, taking a look at our opening hand for game 3. Obviously, we're on the play, which helps. We have Arbor Elf, Blood Moon, and Choke. This is not the ideal hand in terms of disruption for what our opponent's doing, in terms of interrupting their graveyard side of things, but Choke plus Blood Moon could potentially choke them on mana. So I think this hand is defensible. We'll see. Opponent mulligans to 6. We play Knick-Knack with Arbor Elf and go. Opponent plays nothing. Turn 1. Go ahead and run out a Blood Moon. Our opponent fetches a Forest, which might indicate Boseiju perhaps. They go ahead and Foundation Breaker. So, should always be aware of that. We play Blood Moon, or we play Choke, locking them on the island for now. Obviously, we still need to find a graveyard hate piece to kind of close this game out before they can go nuts with mana. We play Seasoned Spyro. Probably should pitch Boseiju here. We find an Endurance, which in a pinch should buy us enough time, unless they obviously have the nuts like Subtlety plus whatchamacallit again. So they're going to go for Shardless Agent. We, 3 Kings of Orient, are. Go ahead and pitch Endurance. Does Lightning Strike twice? It does not look like it does. So, Living End resolves. We bring a bunch of stuff back from the graveyard. We actually have more power in play than we did before. And our opponent is locked from casting some spells. We go ahead and swing for 7. They cycle Street Wraith. I'm not sure why they're aggressively cycling here. Seems a little bit suspect. They grief us, which is whatever. They know we have nothing in hand. And we go ahead and swing for 6. They have Brazen Burrower here. Petty Theft. Go ahead and ping them to 1. Holding up Endurance, and our opponent concedes because, well, they don't have enough mana, and the Choke plan got there, but really it was the Endurance that was the clutch key card in this situation. Alright, taking a look at game number 1 of this match. Once again, Mana Accelerator, Blood Moon. Generally, these are the kind of hands you keep. Opponent is mulliganing. We are against Burn, it looks like. Not the best matchup, not the worst. Probably going to have to lead off on Skenzen or Stomping Ground and actually bolt this Swift Spear. Just doesn't make a ton of sense to not bolt it, because there's a good chance our Arbor Elf just dies, so it's better to take it slow, buy yourself a little bit of time, especially since our opponent's on a mulligan and hasn't done ton of damage. We go ahead and lead off in Utopia Sprawl once again. Could lead on Arbor Elf, but at this point, there's a good chance the Arbor Elf just dies. So, opponent presents Lava Spike. Skewer puts us to 7. Notably has no cards in hand. We go ahead and cast Blood Moon. This does lock them out of some cards, but not a lot. Opponent plays Goblin Guide, puts us to 5. Reveals Stomping Ground. Also keeps them from drawing cards. So while Blood Moon's not overly impressive against Burn, it's fine in this spot. Okay, play Stomping Ground. Play out the Karn Daddy. Go grab Arbor Elf and pass. Going to grab Chalice of the Void, potentially lock out some of our opponent's spells. Opponent plays Swizzle Spear. Now we're in a world of trouble. Possibly we should have played Seasoned Pyro just to set up some blocks. That reveals Utopia Sprawl. Go ahead and chump block, go to 4. We go ahead, cast Spyro, putting Spyro and Sprawl. Get a Fury. We will Chalice on 1. It's possible we should have actually Chaliced on 2 here. And then our opponent goes Riftbolt to the face. Swings in. Revealing a card, eventually. Revealing Bone Crusher Giant. Go ahead and block. Next turn we get to cast Fury. Go grab Sky Sovereign. It's possible we should have grabbed like Haywire Might, but I guess we can't because of Chalice. So Chalice on 1 came back to bite us a little bit here, as there were some options like that in Shadow Spear we could potentially have grabbed. We go ahead and stomp our opponent. Play out, swing out. Go to put our opponent to 9. We play Big Boy. We play Sky Sovereign. Now our opponent has to top deck a non-1-cost spell. They draw Eidolon and die. Alright, back for match number 2. We'll be on the play, or on the draw for this game. Once again, this hand has quite a bit of an early interaction, plus Klothys. Usually a pretty good combination against Burn overall. So, see how this goes. Will they get off to a fast start? Turn 1 Goblin Guide, smack in. Revealing Wooded Foothills. They pass. Unless we draw a Bolt here, we'll be putting in a tapped land. Pass to our opponent. Opponent shocks in, plays a Sanctifier and Vec. Maybe not the matchup for it, but seems okay and a little bit rough, especially in the face of Klothys. There won't be any cards to exile unless we have a green card in the graveyard. So, reveals Bone Crusher. Go ahead and main phase Bone Crusher on. They have an Eidolon. Hit us for 2. Cast Fury to deal with Eidolon. Not take any damage. And then we're set up for Endurance if they don't have some way to answer. Which, given what they're doing, they won't. No one ever expects the Endurance. That'll open up Klothys to being relevant in the game. Now, if we can just stay alive long enough, we'll be able to take over the game with Klothys. They have an Eidolon, not really that big a deal. We exile their Sanctifier and Vec. Cast Bone Crusher Giants, kind of undoing the damage that we just gained, but we do need to close out this game, so Endurance is starting to pressure them. They play another Sanctifier in deck, which, while annoying, it's kind of whatever here. Do the land. Swing in with Endurance. Double block, which is curious, but we take out the Sanctifier. Sure, they kill the Endurance, but once again, we're just kind of at this weird standstill. And as long as Klothys is in play, we don't really care. Because we're going to win this game of inevitability eventually. We swing in with Bone Crusher Giant. They block. Opponent Boros charms us. They run in 6. Pick up Crucible. And our opponent concedes, which seems a little bit weird, considering we're at 6, and there has to be some type of draw that could get them out of this situation. But because I know they're dead next turn, but you would think they would at least take a draw step before they would concede. But, you know, sometimes when you're playing an old out-of-date deck, you have to get a little bit lucky against matchups like Burn. And from the Burn side, historically, this was always a fairly close matchup. Klothys was always one of the cards I didn't want to see, just because it's repeated 2 life a turn. Sanctifier in deck helps fight that a little bit, but when you're playing against a deck that also has big green idiots like Endurance, it's a little less powerful, so, you know, there's a mixed bag when it comes to that, but overall, fairly close matchup, and, you know, we had enough interaction with the Furies and the Stomps to get there. Alright, taking a look at our opening hand in game number 1 against Death by Taco. Kind of love some of these usernames. Definitely an opener. Yeah, good opener. Arbor Elf and potentially Blood Moon. So definitely keeping against a Gigantha deck. Our opponent, who knows what they have? We'll find out in a sec. Arbor Elf go. Looks like we're up against Jeskai Breach, perhaps. Or possibly Izzet Prowess would be my guess here. Opponent could have some burn spells, but we're going to go ahead and play this Endurance. Put stuff in their graveyard, go to block the Monkey. Opponent has a Bolt, so Monkey will continue to live. One of the downsides of playing against Soulscar Mage is its static ability. Opponent off to a good start overall. We have Season Pyro, put some bodies in play. Blood Moon's not going to really do a whole lot here. We draw Fury plus red card, go ahead and kill their board, plus we have blockers. So when you're up against Izzet Prowess, they don't have anywhere near as much reach as a burn deck, so you generally want to answer their creatures as efficiently as possible and get them off the board, and they're a lot less dangerous as far as dealing damage. So Swift Spear is going to swing in here. We're just going to chump block, buy ourselves some time. We draw another Karn, which is less than ideal, but we just go ahead and main phase Endurance. Not sure what I was really playing around here, but I guess they could have some type of soft counter in their deck potentially to play around. But Third Path Iconoclast, Swizzle Spear, Bolt, whole bunch of triggers. Bolt's going face. With a helpful hardware place. Light up the stage. They're doing what Prowess does, which is go extremely wide. So next turn they have Islet and Expressive Iteration. We go chump, bounce off of each other. And I concede here because, well, we're stuck on lands, and that's a very rough place to be as our opponent's board's getting wider and wider, and we draw another 4-drop. As far as sideboarding, Really nothing to sideboard in this matchup. Once again, we're a Karn deck, so there isn't a whole lot of options. We do have a couple of chokes on the sideboard, but they don't generally play that many islands. So, taking a look at this opener, we see acceleration into 3-drop, generally where you want to be. We have Bolt potentially for early interaction as well. Go ahead and grab that. We probably could have grabbed Forest, but just in case they had a kill spell here, no reason to not grab the red source when we had the chance. Opponent has a Monkey, potential Spell Pierce here, but they do not Spell Pierce Bolt, so we can go ahead and probably play Clothes here, though it still might be correct to play Pyro in case they have creatures, but good place to get Clothes on the board. Opponent just puts Giganta in hand. Doesn't seem to be the greatest place in the world for their deck. They're probably keeping some type of controlling-ish hand. Play that. We play that. Play Arbor Elf and pass. Next turn we'll have access to Karn. Potentially go grab something like Chalice of the Void. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we grab a land, then okay, opponent clears most of our board. We go ahead and Karn, grab Chalice. As a very high percentage of their deck is 1-drops, so Chalice, while it does punish us with Arbor Elves, Utopia Sprawls, and such, go ahead and exile on Holy Heat. Play out Chalice on 1. It's again a little bit awkward with things like bolts and such, but put on taps, casts Giganta presumably here. Yep. They choose to swing in, which is curious. I guess they have no hope of clearing out cards anymore. So Endurance is not a terrible draw. This is where not having Liquid Metal Coating in our deck, because I did not have it, was not good. So go ahead and make some tokens with Seasoned Pyro. And their opponent concedes because they're locked out of casting most of their deck, and we have enough jump blockers to buy time for Clothes to close out the game. So, on to game number 3. Alright, taking a look at this opening hand. Not the greatest in this matchup because we don't have any real interaction. We do have Arbor Elf into Seasoned Pyro, which is fine. Running 6 is okay, like it can kill Ragavan, sometimes DRC if their list plays it. Otherwise, it's just grabbing lands, which we already kind of have a lot of anyway. But it is a form of card advantage with Seasoned Pyro, so definitely a hand well, I guess I chose to mulligan that hand. Interesting. Maybe because for the same reason we didn't have any early interaction and our Arbor Elf was likely to die. So this hand was obviously contingent upon drawing a land. So turn 1 Monkey Go. Turn 1 Arbor or Utopia Sprawl. We'll go Swizzle Spear. Gets in for 3. We draw Sekenzin, play Seasoned Pyro to gum up the board, pitch Endurance and Arbor Elf would be my presumption here. Opponent expressively iterates. They exile a Spirebluff Canal, so they're no longer stuck on lands. They only swing with a Swift Spear. We just take it because there are no real profitable blocks to be had. We draw Fury, exile their board, or kill their board, play Clothes. Seems like we're in a good place. Swing in here with just the Seasoned Pyro. Opponent has an Holy Heat, which is whatever. We really don't care about the creatures we have on the board. DRC, DRC. So they're going to get blown out next turn with Endurance. Go ahead and eat their Bauble. No good attacks to be had. Opponent goes to combat. We fetch. go ahead and endurance first before we decide whether we're yeeting bolts at it or not. Obviously not the best outcome for us, but opponent plays Lava Dart. Trying to get the power back in there. DRCs, we jump block. Exile their Lava Dart. Play Spyro, get to draw 2 cards. Pretty good set of cards, I would say. Opponent goes third half to Iconoclast. And once again, Clothis kind of showing its worth in these kind of long, grindy games. Fury to exile their thing. Clothis is now online. Hit them for 5. And the opponent scoops. So, fairly solid ending to that 3-match set. You see the power of the deck when it goes 1-drop into 3-drop. Blood Moons and Chokes help against a good push from the format. Karn help does solve some problems in the deck. Still is not the best at getting into the grindy matchups with like 4-color Omnath or Creativity, but having access to those tools to kind of shut down those decks, like things like Chalice and such, or whatever other options in the sideboard, certainly would have been helpful to have liquid metal coating in this league. But nevertheless, we still do pretty well without it. But always remember when you're registering your deck that you have all the cards that you need to have in your deck, and your deck will treat you nicely. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.